According to the trailers, Spider-Man is about to fight the Hulk in Spider-Man Brand New Day. And honestly, I don't think that's happening just because Marvel wanted a big CGI action scene. Because if you go back through over 60 years of Marvel Comics, something really interesting starts to appear. Spider-Man and the Hulk have fought each other over and over again, but almost never for the reason you'd expect. These aren't stories about two heroes deciding to throw punches. They're stories about misunderstandings, manipulation, impossible choices, and one hero desperately trying to save another. In fact, after reading through every major Spider-Man and Hulk encounter, I noticed something. There is a very clear pattern. Spider-Man almost never sees Hulk as the villain. He sees Bruce Banner, a man who needs saving. And if Marvel Studios is pulling from that history for Brand New Day, I think it tells us something incredibly important about where the movies could be headed. So today, we're going through every major time Spider-Man has fought the Hulk in Marvel Comics. What started each fight? Who actually won? How their relationship evolved over the decades, and finally, what it all could mean for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Because after looking back at every single one of these stories, I don't think Hulk is the real villain at all. Before we jump into the individual fights, I think it's important to understand something. Despite how many times these two have traded punches over the years, Spider-Man and Hulk have never really been enemies. In fact, they're actually far more alike than most people realize. Both of them had their lives changed forever because of science. Bruce Banner was caught in the blast of a gamma bomb. Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. One accident created the strongest man on Earth, and the other created one of the greatest heroes. But while other powers couldn't be more different, the emotional core of their characters is surprisingly similar. Neither of them asked for this. Neither of them wanted their lives to turn out this way, and both spend a large part of their lives being feared by the very people they're trying to protect. Bruce Banner is hunted because people see the Hulk as a monster. Peter Parker is hunted because people see Spider-Man as a menace. They're both constantly misunderstood. They're both burdened by guilt, and perhaps more than any other two Marvel heroes, they understand what it's like to carry the weight of a double life that slowly destroys any chance of living a normal one. That's why Peter has always looked at Bruce Banner a little differently than most heroes. When Iron Man sees Hulk, he sees a threat that needs to be contained. When General Ross sees Hulk, he sees a weapon. And when the military sees Hulk, they see something to destroy. But Peter sees Bruce Banner. He sees a brilliant scientist trapped inside a monster that he never asked to become. And that changes everything. Because if you go back and read these comics, you'll notice something really interesting. Spider-Man almost never starts these fights. He rarely even wants to fight. Most of the time, Hulk has been manipulated, or mind-controlled, or provoked, chased by the military, or simply pushed so far that Bruce loses control. Peter isn't trying to prove he's stronger than the Hulk. Honestly, he knows he isn't. Instead, he's usually buying time, getting civilians out of danger, trying to calm Bruce down, or simply surviving long enough for the Hulk to revert back into Banner. And that's what makes this rivalry so unique. Most superhero rivalries are built around conflict. Batman and Joker, Professor X and Magneto, Captain America and the Red Skull, Spider-Man and Green Goblin. Spider-Man and Hulk are different. The fight is almost never the point. The tragedy is, every time these two collide, there's usually someone pulling the strings, or a situation that spiraled completely out of control. And Peter almost always walks away feeling sorry for Bruce, rather than angry at him. Which is exactly why I think looking back at these stories is so interesting right now. Because if Spider-Man really is about to fight the Hulk in Brand New Day, comic history tells us one thing. Don't expect Hulk to be the real villain. Because for over 60 years, these fights have almost never been about defeating the Hulk. They've been about saving Bruce Banner. To understand Spider-Man and the Hulk's relationship, we have to go all the way back to 1964. Amazing Spider-Man 14. A comic that, funnily enough, isn't just famous for Spider-Man meeting the Hulk, it's also the first appearance of the Green Goblin. So right from the beginning, the issue was destined to become one of the most important Spider-Man comics ever published. The story begins with Peter Parker in a pretty familiar situation. He's still trying to prove himself as a superhero, while also making enough money to survive, when a Hollywood film producer approaches him with an offer to appear in a movie. Peter thinks he's finally caught a break. What he doesn't know is that the producer has been manipulated by the mysterious Green Goblin, who sees Spider-Man as someone worth testing. The Goblin wants to know exactly what this young wall crawler is capable of, so he sets an elaborate trap. Peter travels across the country expecting a movie role. Instead, he walks straight into an ambush involving the Enforcers and the Green Goblin himself. After escaping the initial trap, Spider-Man follows the Goblin into the desert, and that's when everything changes. Because nearby, Bruce Banner is hiding. Banner has transformed into the Hulk and is trying to stay away from civilization, isolated from the rest of the world. Thanks to the chaos caused by Spider-Man and the Green Goblin's battle, Hulk is drawn into the conflict. And suddenly Spider-Man finds himself standing face to face with the strongest being he's ever encountered. Now, remember, this is 1964. Spider-Man is still a relatively new hero. He's never fought anything remotely close to the Hulk before, and it becomes obvious almost immediately. Peter throws everything he has at Hulk. His speed, his agility, his webbing, his incredible reflexes. None of it really matters. Hulk barely notices. Every punch Spider-Man lands feels insignificant compared to the sheer strength standing in front of him. And it's here that Peter learns one of the most important lessons of his superhero career. You don't beat the Hulk by overpowering him, you survive him. Instead of trying to knock the Hulk out, Peter starts thinking. He uses his speed to stay alive. He lures Hulk towards unstable rock formations. He uses the environment to create opportunities. Eventually, Hulk smashes through a blocked cave entrance, inadvertently helping Spider-Man escape, while Banner's situation begins pulling him away from the fight. Neither hero truly wins. Neither hero truly loses. The battle simply ends. And honestly, that's the perfect introduction to this rivalry. Because if you look back at the story today, the fight itself almost feels secondary. The real takeaway is the dynamic between these two characters. Spider-Man isn't trying to conquer the Hulk. He's trying to survive the force of nature. It's less like fighting another superhero and more like trying to outrun an earthquake. What's also fascinating is that there's no hatred between them. There's no personal vendetta, no lifelong grudge. Spider-Man doesn't leave this encounter wanting revenge, and Hulk doesn't become obsessed with defeating Spider-Man. They're simply two heroes whose paths happen to collide because circumstances force them together. And if you've already noticed a pattern developing, good. Because that's exactly what keeps happening throughout the next 60 years of Marvel Comics. Spider-Man almost never seeks Hulk out because he wants to fight him. Time and time again, outside forces throw these two together. Whether it's villains manipulating events, military intervention, or simply bad timing, the clashes almost always happen because someone or something else creates the conflict. This very first encounter sets the blueprint for every Spider-Man vs. Hulk story that follows. They're not two enemies trying to destroy each other, just two heroes caught in situations neither of them actually wanted. Nearly 10 years after their very first encounter, Spider-Man and the Hulk would cross paths again. But this time, Peter Parker doesn't just stumble into Bruce Banner by accident. He actually goes looking for him. And honestly, I think that says a lot about Peter as a character. At this point in Marvel's history, Bruce Banner has become one of the most wanted men on Earth. Every time the Hulk appears, it's front page news. The military is hunting him, or General Ross is hunting him. S.H.I.E.L.D. keeps tabs on him, and pretty much everyone sees the Hulk as a walking natural disaster. But Peter sees a story, and more importantly, a person. Working for the Daily Bugle, Peter learns that the Hulk has been sighted in the remote wilderness of Quebec, Canada. And like any freelance photographer trying to make some money, he heads north hoping to get photographs of the elusive green giant. And of course, things don't exactly go to plan. Bruce Banner is once again on the run, trying to stay hidden from the world. But when Spider-Man finally catches up to him, Hulk mistakes Peter for just another threat. And before Peter has a chance to explain himself, the fight is on. Now, one thing I really love about this battle is how different it feels compared to their first encounter. Back in Amazing Spider-Man 14, Peter was completely overwhelmed. He was a young, inexperienced hero who had never faced anything remotely like the Hulk. But almost a decade later, Spider-Man has grown. He's stronger, he's smarter, he's more confident. You can actually see Peter trying different strategies instead of simply running for his life. He uses his agility to stay constantly on the move. He fires webbing into the Hulk's eyes to buy himself precious seconds. He wraps Hulk's arms together, knowing full well the webbing won't hold forever, but every second matters. He uses the environment to his advantage, bouncing around trees, cliffs, and rock formations, refusing to let the Hulk land a clean hit. And yet, despite all that experience, the result is exactly the same. Spider-Man still can't overpower the Hulk. Every time Peter thinks he's gained the upper hand, Hulk simply tears through the webbing like it's made of paper. Massive boulders become projectiles, entire sections of the forest are flattened. The battle spills across the Canadian wilderness before eventually reaching a hydroelectric dam. And that's when things get even worse. As Hulk smashes through the structure, millions of liters of water come crashing down around them, turning an already impossible fight into a desperate struggle just to survive. Peter isn't thinking about defeating the Hulk anymore. He's thinking about saving himself and saving Bruce, and stopping innocent people from getting caught in the destruction. Eventually, the Canadian military arrives, opening fire on the Hulk. The chaos gives Spider-Man the opportunity to disengage, while Hulk leaps away into the wilderness, disappearing before anyone can capture him. And just like their first encounter, there isn't really a winner. Spider-Man doesn't defeat Hulk, Hulk doesn't defeat Spider-Man. Circumstances simply force the fight to end. But I think that's actually what makes this story so interesting. Because once again, Peter never treats Bruce Banner like a supervillain. Even while Hulk is throwing cars, smashing through buildings, and causing unbelievable destruction, Peter understands that Bruce isn't choosing any of this. He's sick, he's frightened, he's running from an entire world that sees him as nothing more than a monster. And that's something Peter Parker can relate to. After all, Spider-Man knows exactly what it's like to have the world misunderstand who you really are. In a strange way, Bruce Banner represents the path Peter could have taken, a brilliant scientist whose greatest gift became the very thing that destroyed his chances at a normal life. That's why Peter never stops trying to reason with him, even in the middle of a fight, even when every instinct tells him to run. And once again, that becomes the recurring theme of every Spider-Man versus Hulk story. Peter doesn't enter these battles looking for a victory. He enters them hoping to save Bruce Banner. Because, to Spider-Man, Bruce Banner is still worth saving. And if Marvel Studios is taking inspiration from these classic stories for Spider-Man Brand New Day, I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly where the emotional heart of the movie lies. Not Spider-Man defeating the Hulk, but Spider-Man refusing to give up on the man inside him. Just a few years later, Marvel would send Spider-Man and the Hulk crashing into each other once again. And by now, something interesting had happened. The fights had started developing a formula. Not because Marvel was running out of ideas, but because these stories weren't really about Spider-Man beating the Hulk. They were about what Spider-Man does when he's faced with a problem that's simply too big to punch. This time, Peter once again finds himself in Canada. Originally, he's there pursuing Dr. Octopus and following a completely unrelated investigation involving a man named Mr. Rimbaud. At first glance, it has absolutely nothing to do with Bruce Banner. But if you've been paying attention to this video, you probably know what's about to happen. Because somehow, Peter Parker always seems to find the Hulk. As the story unfolds, Bruce Banner appears in the area, and before Peter can make sense of the situation, Banner transforms into the Hulk. Just like that, the mission Peter originally came to Canada for completely disappears. His priorities change instantly, because once the Hulk appears, everything else becomes secondary. The safety of innocent people comes first. Spider-Man quickly changes into costume and throws himself in between the Hulk and the civilians caught in the middle. And once again, Peter is forced into a fight that he never wanted. What I love about this issue is that Peter has now fought the Hulk enough times to understand exactly what he's dealing with. Notice how different his approach is compared to their first encounter back in 1964. He's no longer trying to prove himself, and he's no longer testing his strength. Instead, he fights with a plan. He constantly keeps moving. He never stays in one place for more than a second. He uses webbing to slow Hulk down, not because he thinks it'll actually hold him, but because every moment Hulk spends tearing through webs is another moment civilians have to escape. It's classic Spider-Man. He's buying time. He's managing the disaster. He's not trying to win the fight. And honestly, that's probably the smartest strategy anyone has ever come up with against the Hulk. Because every other hero tends to approach Bruce the same way. Hit him harder, use a bigger weapon, build a stronger suit. Spider-Man understands something different. The longer the fight goes, the angrier Hulk becomes. And the angrier Hulk becomes, the stronger Hulk becomes. So Peter doesn't waste energy trying to overpower him. Instead, he focuses on protecting the people around him, waiting for an opportunity to end the conflict without making things worse. Eventually, military forces arrive on the scene. The sudden intervention changes the entire dynamic of the battle. The Hulk's attention shifts away from Spider-Man and towards the soldiers firing at him, giving Peter the chance to pull back as Bruce escapes once again. And for the third major time in Marvel history, neither hero truly wins. There isn't a knockout, There isn't a decisive victory. There isn't even much satisfaction. The fight simply ends because circumstances change. And that's becoming impossible to ignore. 3 major Spider-Man versus Hulk stories, 3 fights, and not a single one is really about defeating the other. Instead, they're all built around the same central idea. Spider-Man doesn't see Bruce Banner as an enemy. He sees a man who's lost control, a man who's terrified of who he's become, and someone worth risking his own life to protect. I actually think that's one of the reasons these stories have aged so well. On paper, Spider-Man vs. the Hulk just sounds like a spectacle. It's Marvel's strongest heroes against one of its most agile. But when you actually read the comics, the emotional conflict is always far more interesting than the physical one. Peter knows he can't beat the Hulk. Bruce doesn't actually want to hurt Spider-Man. They're 2 fundamentally good people trapped in an impossible situation. And that's why, decades later, these stories still feel so different than most superhero fights. They're not really about winning, they're about surviving, and hoping Bruce Banner can come back before someone gets hurt. By 1979, Spider-Man and the Hulk had become one of Marvel's favorite unlikely matchups, so much so that Marvel published an entire one-shot dedicated solely to the 2 of them, appropriately titled Spider-Man vs. the Hulk. And if you've been following along so far, you'll probably notice something almost immediately. Even though the comic has verses right there in the title, the fight still isn't really the point. The story begins at Empire State University, where Peter is simply trying to enjoy what little normal life he has left. Of course, being Peter Parker, normal never lasts very long. Bruce Banner is nearby, desperately trying to stay hidden while searching for a way to control the monster inside him. But when an emergency unfolds involving a young girl whose life is suddenly in danger, Bruce does what Bruce Banner always does. He tries to help. Unfortunately, helping means transforming into the Hulk. And once the Hulk appears, panic spreads almost instantly. People start running, authorities arrive, weapons are drawn, chaos erupts. Spider-Man immediately swings into action, but not because he wants to fight the Hulk. He swings in because innocent people are now trapped in the middle of a disaster. And that's such an important distinction. Peter's first instinct isn't, how do I beat the Hulk? It's, how do I stop anyone from getting hurt? Throughout the fight, Spider-Man does exactly what we've now seen him do time and time again. He stays constantly on the move. He uses every inch of his agility to avoid Hulk's devastating attacks. He fires webs into Hulk's face to disrupt his vision. He swings around buildings, uses light poles, construction equipment, anything in the environment that buys him even a few extra seconds. Because Peter understands something that almost every other Marvel hero seems to forget. Standing toe-to-toe with Hulk is suicide. The one way to survive is to never stop moving. And that's exactly what makes Spider-Man such an interesting opponent for Hulk. Thor meets strength with strength. The Thing tries to outmuscle him. Iron Man builds bigger armor. Spider-Man doesn't have that luxury. His greatest weapon has never been his strength. It's his brain. Every dodge, every swing, every joke he cracks in the middle of the fight, it's all calculated. Peter is constantly analyzing the battlefield, looking for ways to redirect Hulk's attention, create openings, and keep innocent people out of harm's way. In many ways, he's fighting a completely different battle than Hulk is. Hulk is reacting with raw emotion. Spider-Man is solving a problem. Eventually, the situation begins to settle as Hulk's anger starts to fade, allowing Bruce Banner to regain control. And just like almost every encounter we've covered so far, the fight doesn't end because Spider-Man knocks Hulk out. It ends because Bruce Banner comes back. And honestly, I think this issue might contain the single biggest lesson Marvel has ever taught us about Spider-Man versus the Hulk. Spider-Man's real victory isn't defeating the Hulk, it's keeping everyone alive long enough for Bruce Banner to return. That's what success looks like. Not standing over Hulk after some impossible knockout, but preventing a tragedy. Because at the end of the day, Peter Parker has never viewed Bruce Banner as another supervillain to defeat. He's always viewed him as someone suffering from a curse, someone who deserves compassion. By now, we've covered 4 major Spider-Man and Hulk encounters, and the pattern couldn't be clearer. Every single time they meet, Peter isn't trying to win, he's trying to save Bruce Banner. But the next story takes the idea even further, because instead of simply surviving the Hulk, Spider-Man actually starts trying to understand him. If there was one comic that perfectly captures the relationship between Spider-Man and the Hulk, it's probably Marvel Team Up 126. Because for the first time, the fight isn't really about Spider-Man trying to stop the Hulk. It's about Spider-Man trying to save Bruce Banner. The The story opens in Manhattan, where the Hulk suddenly appears in the middle of New York City. Now, if you've been reading Marvel Comics for any length of time, you already know what happens next. People panic, cars screech to a halt, crowds scatter in every direction, police flood the streets. Within minutes, the city is treating Hulk like a full-scale military invasion. And honestly, can you blame them? To everyone watching from the outside, Hulk looks like an unstoppable monster tearing through the city. But Peter Parker has seen this before. He knows that beneath all the rage is Bruce Banner, a man who never wanted any of this, a man who's terrified of what he's become every time he loses control. So instead of standing alongside the police and adding even more chaos to an already impossible situation, Spider-Man does something completely different. He deliberately draws Hulk's attention onto himself, not because he wants to fight him, but because he wants to lead him away from everyone else. I absolutely love this decision because it tells you everything you need to know about Peter Parker. He's not thinking about winning, he's thinking about the civilians. If Hulk is chasing Spider-Man, then Hulk isn't smashing through apartment buildings. He isn't throwing police cars. He isn't putting hundreds of innocent lives at risk. Peter becomes the distraction. And in classic Spider-Man fashion, he spends the next several pages doing exactly what he does best. Swinging through the city, keeping Hulk focused on him, constantly talking, constantly moving, always staying just out of reach. It's almost like watching someone trying to outrun a tornado. There are moments when Peter even questions himself. He knows this plan probably isn't going to work forever. He knows one mistake could get him killed. But he also knows someone has to keep Hulk away from the public. So he keeps going. Eventually, something interesting happens. Instead of becoming angrier and angrier, Hulk begins calming down. The chase slows. The rage starts fading. And before Peter's eyes, the Hulk transforms back into Bruce Banner. Now, this is my favorite moment in the entire issue, because the fight is over. Spider-Man has no reason to stay. Bruce Banner is vulnerable. The authorities could arrive at any second. Peter could simply swing away, but he doesn't. Instead, he changes back into Peter Parker and approaches Bruce as a person, not as Spider-Man and not as a superhero, just as another human being checking in to make sure everyone else is okay. It's such a small moment, but I honestly think it says something special about who Peter Parker is. Because after everything Hulk just put him through, after almost being crushed, after risking his own life, Peter's first instinct isn't anger, it's compassion. He wants to know if Bruce is alright, and that's something very few Marvel heroes ever do. Most heroes fight back. Peter worries about Banner. I honestly think this comic explains why Spider-Man and Hulk have remained such an interesting pairing for over 60 years. Yes, the action is fun. Yes, seeing the strongest hero in Marvel try to catch the fastest wall crawler is entertaining, but that's not what makes these stories memorable. What makes them memorable is that Peter never loses sight of Bruce Banner. He refuses to define Bruce by the worst moments. He refuses to see Hulk as just another villain. Instead, he sees someone who's suffering, someone who's scared, someone who's trapped inside a body that destroys everything around him. Peter understands that feeling better than almost anyone. Because while he may not turn into a green monster, Peter Parker almost lives every day carrying a burden he never asked for. Both men have lost a chance at a normal life because of scientific accidents. Both know what it feels like to be feared. Both know what it feels like to be hunted. And maybe that's why Peter never gives up on Bruce. Because in another life, Bruce Banner could have been him, or Peter Parker could have become Bruce Banner. And that's why out of every Spider-Man vs. Hulk comic we've talked about so far, this one might be the most important. Not because it has the biggest fight, but because it reminds us that Spider-Man's greatest strength has never been his powers, it's his empathy. By the mid-1980s, Spider-Man and the Hulk had already crossed paths several times. So when Marvel brought them together again in Web of Spider-Man 7, they decided to do something completely different. Instead of asking, what happens if Spider-Man fights the Hulk, the comic asks, what does the Hulk represent to Peter Parker? Because this isn't a traditional superhero battle, it's a psychological one. The story introduces Nightmare, one of Doctor Strange's oldest enemies and the literal ruler of the dream dimension. Nightmare doesn't defeat people with strength. He feeds on fear. He twists people's dreams. He takes their greatest anxieties and turns them into living nightmares. And when Peter Parker becomes trapped inside one of those nightmares, one of the biggest threats his subconscious can imagine is the Incredible Hulk. I actually love this concept because it says something about how Peter views Bruce Banner. Notice that Hulk isn't presented like the Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus or Venom. Peter isn't afraid because Hulk is evil. He's afraid because Hulk is unstoppable. That's a huge difference. When Peter fights Green Goblin, he's fighting someone who's trying to kill him. When Peter imagines fighting Hulk, he's fighting a force of nature, an avalanche, an earthquake, a tidal wave wearing human skin. Throughout the nightmare, Spider-Man is forced into another desperate battle against Hulk. But just like dreams themselves, nothing really follows normal rules. The environment constantly changes. Reality bends around Peter, and every escape seems to create another impossible obstacle. It's chaotic and confusing, and that's exactly the point. Because Nightmare isn't trying to test Spider-Man's strength. He's trying to overwhelm Peter psychologically. He's weaponizing one of the few opponents Peter genuinely knows he can't overpower. And that's something we've seen throughout this entire video. Spider-Man has never approached Hulk believing he could simply punch his way to victory. He knows that's impossible. So even inside Peter's own subconscious, the answer isn't beat Hulk. It's survive him, outsmart him, find another way. Eventually, Peter manages to break free from Nightmare's influence, ending the illusion and escaping the dream altogether. So technically, this isn't one of Spider-Man's biggest victories over the Hulk. In fact, it isn't even really a victory over the Hulk at all. It's a victory over fear. But I still think it's an important story because it reinforces something every previous comic has already shown us. Even inside Peter Parker's own mind, the Hulk isn't seen as a villain. He's seen as the ultimate impossible challenge. The hero you can't outmuscle. The problem you have to outthink. And honestly, I think that's exactly how Marvel Studios should approach Hulk in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Not as someone Peter can simply defeat, but as an obstacle so overwhelming that intelligence, compassion, and quick thinking become far more important than raw power. By this point, Marvel had firmly established what made Spider-Man and Hulk stories work. But then, in the late 1980s, they decided to flip the entire formula on its head. Because for the first and almost only time, Spider-Man wouldn't just survive the Hulk, he'd actually have the power to beat him. Everything we've talked about so far has led to one simple conclusion. Spider-Man cannot beat the Hulk. He can outsmart him. He can survive him. He can distract him. He can save civilians from him. But he can't actually defeat him. Well, almost. Because in 1990, Marvel completely turned the relationship on its head. For a brief period of time, Peter Parker became something far more powerful than just friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He became Cosmic Spider-Man. Now, if you've never heard of Cosmic Spider-Man before, don't worry, you're definitely not alone there. This is one of the strangest but coolest periods in Spider-Man's history. Peter temporarily bonded with the Captain Universe Force, an almost godlike cosmic energy that chooses ordinary people in moments when the universe needs protecting. Unlike the Enigma Force's previous hosts, Peter retained all of his Spider-Man abilities while also gaining unbelievable new sets of powers. Suddenly he wasn't just stronger, he had cosmic awareness, near limitless energy manipulation, the ability to fly, matter manipulation, incredible durability, and strength that put him in an entirely different league. For the first time in his life, Peter Parker wasn't the underdog anymore. And then, Marvel did exactly what every reader wanted to see. They put him up against the Hulk. The fight takes place during the Massive Acts of Vengeance storyline, when Loki secretly manipulates Marvel's greatest villains into attacking heroes they wouldn't normally face. The idea was simple. Heroes know how to beat their own villains, but what if you completely mixed up the matchups? So instead of fighting Dr. Octopus or the Green Goblin, Spider-Man suddenly finds himself facing the Incredible Hulk. Except, this isn't the Spider-Man Hulk had fought before. The Hulk charges, confident, unstoppable, exactly as we've seen throughout this entire video. He's expecting another hero who's going to bounce around him, throw a few webs, maybe crack a couple of jokes before eventually getting flattened. Instead, Peter calmly tells Hulk to stop. Hulk ignores him. So Peter throws a single punch, one punch, and Hulk is knocked unconscious. just like that. Honestly, if you only saw that page without any context, you'd probably think it was a fake. Because after everything we've covered, Spider-Man knocking out the Hulk in one hit sounds almost impossible. But that's exactly why this moment became so iconic. Not because it proved Spider-Man was secretly stronger than Hulk, but because it proved just how unbelievably powerful the Captain Universe enhancement actually was. This wasn't Peter Parker suddenly discovering hidden strength he'd always had. This wasn't Spider-Man finally learning how to beat Hulk. This was a temporary version of Spider-Man operating on an almost cosmic level. Marvel wanted readers to understand immediately that this wasn't business as usual. And nothing sells that idea better than having Spider-Man casually do something that almost nobody else in the Marvel Universe could. Even Peter himself seemed surprised by just how much power he's been given. What's really interesting, though, is what happens after the fight. Peter doesn't celebrate, and he doesn't brag. He doesn't stand over Hulk claiming he's finally proven himself. Instead, he immediately recognizes that this level of power is actually terrifying, because for the first time in his life, he's the one who has to worry about holding back. And I think that's such a clever piece of writing. Throughout his entire career, Peter has been the weaker hero trying to survive impossible situations. Now the roles have completely reversed. For once, he's the dangerous one. It's also worth mentioning that this story is the biggest exception in Spider-Man and Hulk history. If you ask comic fans, has Spider-Man ever beaten the Hulk? This is almost always the issue they'll point to. But that's because it's the only version of Spider-Man that realistically could. The normal Spider-Man we've been talking about throughout this video, he still can't beat Hulk in a straight fight. This wasn't Peter Parker becoming stronger than Bruce Banner. This was Peter temporarily borrowing that power of a cosmic entity capable of reshaping reality itself. That's a massive difference. And honestly, I think that's why this comic works so well. It gives readers the spectacle they'd always wanted, Spider-Man actually defeating the Hulk. But it does it without undermining everything that came before. Because Marvel understood something important. Spider-Man shouldn't normally beat the Hulk. That's not what makes this rivalry interesting. The interesting part has always been watching an ordinary hero with extraordinary courage stand toe-to-toe with someone he has absolutely no business fighting. Cosmic Spider-Man is that exception, not the rule. And after this brief period, Peter would eventually lose the Captain Universe powers and return to being the Spider-Man we all know, the underdog. The guy who wins with intelligence instead of strength. The guy who still refuses to give up on Bruce Banner. Because at the end of the day, that's the Spider-Man readers have always loved. After Cosmic Spider-Man, Marvel would mostly return to the classic formula we'd seen for decades. Spider-Man wasn't trying to beat the Hulk anymore, he was trying to survive him. Which is why the next major chapter in their history is actually a little surprising. One of Marvel's biggest crossover events featured the Hulk at his absolute most dangerous, and yet Spider-Man wasn't there to save the day. He was there for the exact reason you probably expect. Now, before we move on to the final chapter of Spider-Man and Hulk's comic history, I want to jump over to another universe, because in the early 2000s, Marvel launched the Ultimate Universe. The idea was simple. Take Marvel's biggest heroes, strip away decades of complicated continuity, and reintroduce them for a brand new generation of readers. This was a younger Marvel universe, a more grounded Marvel universe, and most importantly, a younger Spider-Man. Now, if you've ever wondered why Tom Holland's Peter Parker feels so different from Spider-Man of the comics we've talked about so far, a lot of that DNA actually comes from the Ultimate Universe. Peter is only 15 years old. He's still figuring out his powers, still making mistakes, still trying to balance high school with superhero life. He's brave, but he's nowhere near the experienced hero we've seen in the main Marvel universe, which makes his encounter with the Hulk absolutely terrifying. Unlike many of the previous stories we've covered, this version of the Hulk isn't portrayed as a misunderstood superhero first. He's presented almost like a horror movie monster. Massive, unpredictable, completely uncontrollable. When Peter first comes face to face with him, there's no sense that Spider-Man has a plan, no clever strategy he's perfected over years of fighting Bruce Banner, no confidence born from experience. Instead, Peter reacts exactly how you'd expect a 15-year-old kid to react with a 7-foot green monster starts tearing through everything in sight. He's scared. And honestly, that fear comes across brilliantly in the artwork. Every leap the Hulk makes feels enormous. Every punch looks like it could kill Peter instantly. Every building around them suddenly feels far too small to contain the destruction. What makes the fight so compelling is how outmatched Peter really is. We've spent the entire video talking about Spider-Man using intelligence to survive the Hulk. But here, even that's difficult. Peter is still learning. He hasn't developed years of instincts. He hasn't fought the Hulk multiple times before. Everything is happening in real time. He's improvising, making mistakes, barely staying alive. And that's exactly what makes Ultimate Spider-Man so relatable. He's not the polished veteran swinging confidently into danger. He's just a kid trying to do the right thing. Throughout the encounter, Peter quickly realizes something we've already seen play out several times in Earth 616. He cannot beat the Hulk. Every punch he throws feels meaningless. His webbing barely slows Hulk down. His agility keeps him alive, but it doesn't solve the problem. Instead, Peter falls back on the one thing that defines every version of Spider-Man. He refuses to quit. And when he's exhausted, even when he's terrified, even when every instinct tells him to run, he keeps getting back up. And honestly, I think that's why this version of the fight has become such a fan favorite. It's not because Spider-Man wins, he doesn't. It's because this might be the purest example of Peter Parker's courage we've seen so far. There isn't some hidden power-up waiting around the corner. There's no Captain Universe enhancement. There's no clever gadget that's suddenly going to level the playing field. It's just a teenage kid standing in front of something infinitely stronger than himself because someone has to. And honestly, doesn't that sound familiar? We're looking at Spider-Man Brand New Day. I think that this comic might actually be one of Marvel Studios' biggest sources of inspiration. Think about it. Tom Holland's Peter isn't a veteran Avenger anymore. The world has forgotten who he is. He has no Stark technology, no Avengers backup, no billionaire mentor. He's back to being the underdog, just like Ultimate Peter. I don't expect Marvel to adapt the Cosmic Spider-Man story where Peter knocks him out with one punch. I think they're much more likely to adapt this feeling. A young Spider-Man completely out of his depth, just to survive against an opponent he has absolutely no chance of overpowering. Because that's always been Spider-Man at his best. Not when he's the strongest person in the room, but when he's the bravest. So, after reading every major Spider-Man vs. Hulk story, something started jumping out at me. At first I thought these comics were just a collection of fun superhero fights. Spider-Man meets Hulk. They punch each other for 20 pages. Bruce Banner calms down, the end. But that's actually not what these stories are all about. When you line them up, one after another, you start noticing the exact same themes appearing over and over again. And I don't think that that's an accident, because Marvel has spent over 60 years telling us exactly what Spider-Man's relationship with the Hulk is supposed to be. The first pattern is the most obvious one. Spider-Man almost never wins by force. In fact, outside of Cosmic Spider-Man, where Peter Parker was temporarily given near godlike powers, he doesn't beat the Hulk, ever. He survives him, he distracts him, he outsmarts him. But Marvel has always understood that Peter Parker shouldn't physically overpower Bruce Banner. If he could, the story instantly becomes less interesting, because Spider-Man isn't inspiring because he's the strongest. He's inspiring because he refuses to stop trying, despite knowing the odds are stacked completely against him. That's who Peter Parker has always been. The second pattern is something I honestly didn't appreciate until researching this video. Spider-Man almost never sees Hulk as a villain. Think about every major fight we've covered. Amazing Spider-Man 14, Amazing Spider-Man 119, Marvel Team Up, Ultimate Marvel Team Up, even the dream sequence in Web of Spider-Man. Peter never approaches Bruce the same way he approaches Green Goblin, or Dr. Octopus, or Venom. He isn't trying to punish Bruce, he's trying to save him. That's such an important distinction, because Bruce Banner isn't choosing to become the Hulk. He's living with a curse. And Peter understands what it's like to have your life defined by something that happened to you rather than something you chose. They're two men carrying burdens neither of them asked for. Maybe that's why Peter never gives up on Bruce. He sees the man, not just the monster. Then there's the third pattern, and I actually think this might be the biggest one. Spider-Man always protects everyone else first. Go back through every fight. How often is Peter actually trying to knock Hulk unconscious? Almost never. Instead, he's evacuating civilians, leading Hulk away from crowds, buying time, stopping buildings from collapsing, keeping innocent people alive. That's the real victory, not beating the Hulk, saving everyone else caught in the middle. And honestly, I think that's Spider-Man in his purest form. Anyone can write a hero who punches harder. Very few heroes are written to sacrifice themselves over and over again just to save strangers they'll never meet again. That's Peter Parker, every single time. Finally, there's one last pattern, and it's the one I think matters most heading into Spider-Man Brand New Day. Every time Marvel brings Spider-Man and Hulk together, it changes Peter. Not because he becomes stronger, but because he grows. Each encounter forces him to think differently, to lead, to improvise, to make impossible decisions under impossible pressure. These stories aren't really about Hulk, they're about Peter proving why he's Spider-Man. Which brings me back to Brand New Day. While it would be cool, I don't want some giant CGI slugfest that forgets everything the comics have spent 60 years teaching us. What I want is exactly what made every great Spider-Man versus Hulk story work in the first place. A young Peter Parker, completely outmatched, completely overwhelmed, trying to save innocent people while also refusing to give up on Bruce Banner. Because that's never really a story about Spider-Man fighting the Hulk. It's been a story about Spider-Man reminding everyone, including Bruce Banner himself, that there's still a man underneath the monster. And honestly, I think that's the version of this relationship Marvel Studios has the chance to finally bring to the big screen. So, after 60 years of comics, dozens of encounters, and countless punches thrown, the biggest lesson isn't that Spider-Man can beat the Hulk, it's that he never needed to. And if Brand New Day understands that, we could be about to get the best Spider-Man and Hulk story we've ever seen on screen. But now I want to hear from you. Did I miss any Spider-Man and Hulk encounters? How do you think Marvel Studios will approach them on screen? And what is the one thing you want to see from their interactions? Anyway, let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Marvel lore, don't forget to subscribe, because we've got a lot more Spider-Man coverage coming as we get closer to the film's release. Until next time, guys, this is LFGs, and I'm out.
W's in the shot.